Darkly Splendid Abodes, the official podcast of Toronto Thelema, exploring, if you will, practical philosophy, from science and the workings of the mind to spirituality, esotericism, and magic. Stooping down, dipping my wings, I came into the darkly splendid abodes. As we cap off our first 6 months of deep dips, Michael and I look back over our conversations and reflect on the texts we've delved into. Crowley's translation of the Tao Teh King, Liber de Lege Libellum, the essay by Jack Parsons entitled Freedom is a Two-Edged Sword, and Lecture 4 from Crowley's 8 lectures on yoga. What were our favorite takeaways? And how do we feel we benefited from this project?
No, I think we can get started. I think it might even be funny if you wanted to, because this is a little bit more casual, if you wanted to just do like a running start and just fade us in anywhere there.
Just come in the mid-combo.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the goal of today's talk, I still feel obligated to say, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, live under will.
Beautiful. It would be chilling if I just got a long silence after that. And
maybe I'm allowed to tell a story. Oh. Somebody noticed my tattoo one time. And asked me what it said, and I said, it says, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. There is no law beyond do what thou wilt. And he said, oh, Mr. Crowley. and I said, you're familiar. And he goes, oh, long ago. And, we chatted for a good long time. And I said, there's still stuff happening locally if you're interested in hanging out sometime. He goes, oh, no, that was all in my 20s. I left that behind long ago. And as he left, I said 93, which is a shorthand for the formal greeting. And when I said it, his face dropped and his eyes opened wide, and he just stared at me. And and I was managing a coffee shop, so I had prepared his order, and he almost walked backwards out the door without breaking eye contact. And then there was a huge picture window in the front of the shop. And the whole way back to his condo, he stared at me through the window, and he never came in again.
Wow.
It was like he was all game to talk about it until I used the greeting, and I don't know what it was. It was like he had a Vietnam flashback or something. Or
recovered memories, I guess.
It was very weird.
Hey,
Not
man,
the reaction I was expecting.
Yeah, it's like I personally, obviously, I think both of us feel really strongly about being involved with Thelema and that sort of thing. But there's certainly people and circumstances I can imagine that could produce traumatic events.
I think anyone who's been around the community for more than 10 minutes has had at least one traumatic event. This horrible, every once in a generation, something really terrible will happen.
For those of you just joining us, you heard it here first. Don't get involved in Thelema.
That's not what I'm saying, but it's good to keep your wits about you whenever you're meeting new people.
This is true.
Can I sort of derailed you. I do want to hear what you think the point of this conversation is.
Well, see, this is your elaborate scheme to get me to have to explain it, where I would have been asking you. But this is a catch-up. We're playing check-in here. So so far we've done 5 deep dips. I guess technically 4 different books, or pieces. But we ended up doing 2 on Jack Parsons' essay. So we're doing a little check-in here.
I was glad to have the break in the Parsons because I felt like I needed more than 2 weeks to figure out what was going on.
It was kind of nice too. Yeah, we kept it fresh, so we were able to. I felt like I was able to come back to it. Taking a break from it and coming back to it, it just felt like, okay, it's rejuvenating it. Where instead of just kind of being in the mire of it, so it was kind of nice. Yeah, having a little bit of a change of pace there. But yeah, it was amazing how deep we were able to get into that, and I think that's kind of the same with each of these so far. That's one of the discoveries that I've made is. I figured we could talk at length just because it's exciting to talk about this stuff. This is stuff we're interested in. But the fact that we're able to get so deep into it and not completely dredge everything out is kind of eye-opening. No matter what text we're looking at, it seems to be the case.
Is there anything that you feel is like new for you after doing these close reads together for the last, I guess for us it's been about 2 months, but for the world it will have been closer to 6. It's not, I don't think it's the first time either of us have read any of these. It might have been my first time through the Tao Teh King. And really kind of understanding some of what that was about. I think that's the text we treated least fully in our episode, because it's kind of the
was our first one.
At least, and structurally the most cumbersome.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of. I think I forgot that you had initially suggested we just concentrate on the first 50 pages or something like that.
And even that is not sufficient. What needs to be done is to rearrange the chapters by subject and approach it one subject at a time, so that you're not confused by the leaping from topic to topic. And I didn't understand that because it was the first time I think I'd really read it.
Yeah, that was eye-opening. That text, yeah, in hindsight, I could totally see where we could do a whole lot of research to put something really, really in-depth together that was really scholarly and all that sort of thing. But I mean, that's something we didn't, I don't know how we kind of graced off of, but we're not scholars and we're not treating this as a scholarly thing exactly. We're treating it as, two enthusiasts deep diving into the material. And I think your initial idea in suggesting this was to demonstrate what can be done by deep diving like this, for everybody. For a listener who might, or a reader who might think of themselves as a little bit more casual, someone who's smart and cares enough to pursue it, but hasn't been rigorously studied, or because I feel like a lot of the secondary source material is from the perspective of someone who really thinks they know something and they're trying to tell you something about it from an authoritative they're
position,
explaining it to you. It's true.
Which is what secondary material is supposed to be. But I think the common criticism is that the way the secondary material is handled in Thelema is that it distracts from the text and wallpapers over some of the less pleasant stuff or some of the more difficult stuff, and is supposed to not supposed to, but has the effect of giving people a way out. So I thought it would be cute to show that you don't really need someone else to get between you and Crowley if you're prepared to do a little bit of work. And so, we've been around this stuff a long time, and this is one of the things I want to ask you today, because I don't really know, is that you and I have known each other for 10 years, and that's about as long as I've been doing it. My introduction was those lectures that you and RAM were doing for a little while back then. But I'm not in the 10 years that I've been working with this material. I haven't published a book, or I haven't, attained my KNC, or whatever other ways people might claim authority. So I'm just an intelligent reader who can, and showing what can be done from the perspective of an intelligent reader. How did you get, this is not the high school question of like, hey, when did you first discover Crowley? But how did you end up taking this seriously, and when did you first kind of show up around Thelema?
Funny, I was just thinking about that just shortly before we initiated this discussion, because I was thinking about Lon Milo Duquette, and for some reason I was mulling over something or other, and it occurred to me, like, what if somebody was to ask me about my thoughts on Lon Milo Duquette, and I would inevitably be ambivalent, because that's an example of, I guess, would you call that a secondary writer, or what was it? Is that what we were saying? Secondary.
That's who one of the people you might point to when you're talking about secondary material. Mm-hmm. He, I think, is trying to be serious secondary material, or at least wants to be thought of that way. But I don't know if he really rises to commenting on Crowley stuff.
Yeah, I don't think
in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that he tends to present material, whether it's Crowley or other sources and whatnot, and that's really what he's there for, is presenting this stuff.
It's really quite cute. And
so a lot of people like that cuteness factor and the accessibility and that sort of thing. But
there's some ritual instruction which people might find helpful, and his Monday night magic class is more than most people ever do. That he really does, I think, still meet once a week at his house and help people get their toes in with Enochian magic and experience a little bit of something like that. But I do think that he's one of these guys that does more wall building than gate opening, in terms of the ability of his readers to understand the material and take it seriously. Yeah, they understand his material. Yeah, but they don't become less intimidated to approach Crowley in the original, or God forbid, any of the people that Crowley was inspired by, who are often even more opaque than he is. I think Crowley's clarity is what makes him, is what recommends him. He's the best English language writer on yoga, period. Yeah. So,
I mean, we can get into a whole discussion on that, because I can understand where people would have difficulty with Crowley. I was lucky in that I had already been really big into Charles Dickens and familiar with Victorian writing styles and that sort of thing. And I think if you're a modern reader, especially if you're not steeped in other time periods and writing styles and that sort of thing, that could be problematic. But just to drag it back around, going back to my ambivalence about Lon Milo Duquette, the reason I put it that way is because of the fact that the first book that got me into Thelema, and even gave me any indication of Thelema, the word, and that sort of thing, was his book, The Magick of Aleister Crowley, which I had stumbled across in a bookstore, and I'd only remembered Aleister Crowley from having heard about him being, in one of these books that I think were left over from the 70s that were about like UFOs and paranormal things, and then there was this one chapter on Crowley which was very lurid and talking about he was a member of this satanic cult called the Golden Dawn, and going into all this, he seduced a school teacher and killed a cat 9 times, and going on about all the most lurid aspects of this thing that they could play up and dredge out of the yellow papers from back then. And so that's my image of Crowley, this really dark kind of interesting, intriguing sort of thing. And I think contemporaneous with that, I was, I bought the Necronomicon that you can get in, Indigo chapters stores and that sort of thing, and is apparently like just completely made up and everything. But at the time, it was fascinating to me, being young and everything. But later on, fast forward 10 years, and I stumbled. That's sort of the background that I had, was with anything to do with magic, was just this really fascinating, mysterious world. And then when I happened to walk by this Magic of Aleister Crowley book in an Indigo chapters, I pulled it off the shelf and was like, it was out of perverse curiosity and thinking, I want to fuck with this and see what happens. And as I got into it, it was weird because right off the bat, it was just a lot of Lon Milo DuQuette apologizing for Crowley and trying to poke holes in all of the gossip and everything like that around him. But then, and which didn't mean anything to me because I didn't know anything about, it was kind of just, okay, all right, calm down, stop apologizing or whatever. But when I started getting into actually Crowley's own writing, and it was particularly when I was reading Liber and his commentary on Liber, I was kind of floored because I realized, oh my God, this is somebody who's like, all of the philosophies, all the ideas that I had sort of generated seemingly on my own, this was aligned with, and it had gone a lot further. It was like I had sort of realized at some point that I needed a map for the soul, so to speak, to find my way around, but I was lacking that and lost in the dark as a result. And I discovered when I was reading Crowley's own writing there, it was like realizing, okay, this is somebody who's actually gone there and had access to maps that I didn't have. And that was what was really fascinating about that. So it was like this discovery. So my ambivalence about Lon Milo DuQuette is just that it's like, well, it was making it accessible. I think now the internet is so much more prevalent for that kind of thing, especially since I wasn't much of an internet person, even when there was a lot of the internet going on and all that sort of thing anyway.
I don't want to pull this thread too hard. I don't want it to become just bash any particular pop writer, because I think the pop rating is the problem, not any particular individual.
Who else you got? Bring it on.
But this thing about the apologizing, is it totally disingenuous? Because Crowley really is many of the things that people are afraid that he is. And do these people just not know that? They have access to more of the material than we do. They must know that he was often a really bad dude, and to pretend he wasn't. What the hell is going on? Why are these people lying to us?
Well, I think this is, it's one of those things where we always seem to, as human beings, we have what I've been, I think in these podcasts, I've started to describe as insect mentality of it has to be on one side or the other. And we can't seem to fathom the idea that there's gradients to things. And a person can be complicated.
Right.
I don't think Crowley, I think Crowley, I think he was a much better person in a lot of ways than people realize. And I think he was a lot worse in some ways than people want to accept. But I think he was a complicated person. I think he was genuine in his aspirations.
Yeah, no, that's correct. His teaching was sincere, and his aspiration, I think, was sincere, and his attainments. It's difficult to evaluate this claim until you're quite deeply in it. So we're just going to have to take our own words for it. But his attainments, I think, are also true and sincere. And so, but I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit and ask about some of the stuff we've particularly been working on the last couple of months, and see if it changed anything for you in terms of your practice, your comprehension, your approach, either to living perhaps or to Thelema, generally speaking. As I was saying, it's not the first time for either of us looking at these texts, but it may be the deepest time.
Yeah.
Is there anything new happening for you?
Well, I do want to point out that, yeah, it was a deeper in a different way, certainly. I mean, you go through reading any of these texts and maybe you're making notes and trying to dig deeper into it, but it is a different thing when you're going to be discussing it. You want to, really be understanding it and having it mapped out in your head and that sort of thing. So that really makes a huge difference. And I've definitely noticed that certain things have been sticking with me. Like, for instance, in Liber Libellum, there's a phrase where Crowley says, he quotes from the Book of the Law, "Thou hast no right but to do thy will, do that, and no other shall say nay." And he suggests, write it in your brain, burn it into your brain, and keep that with you deeply. And I started doing that. In fact, I made a mantra out of it. I used it as a mantra, and I will do that sometimes, and that really helps, I find, keeping that deeply in the forefront of my mind, thinking of things in those terms. And I think it's a similar way to doing resh regularly and saying will before meals and that sort of thing.
People lose track of their own agency so easily. Life will just take them and carry them. And if you're going in the right direction, that's the nice thing about life, is to be taken and carried in the right direction. But when external forces start making demands upon your time, it's very easy to forget that you can say no. Or to worry about other people saying no to you rather than just doing things.
Yeah, and I mean, you react to the world around you and that sort of thing, and that can take you out of your focused place, for sure. So, I mean, there's that. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, mine is Liber Libellum too. I read Liber B Vel Magi again fairly recently, which I now understand to be substantially about redemption. And there's this question of what redemption means in the context of Thelema. People don't like the word. They feel it's sort of too Christian-y. And this may be too dense or too interpretive to go into right now, but this idea of like a fall of man, where man is removed from nature, sees himself as separate from nature, whether that's because, he's eaten of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or whether that's because he lives in this world of sense impressions and can't understand the real material world, or whether that's because he's become too technologically sophisticated and is now an anti-natural animal who could somehow, destroy the world by his behaviors. But there's many different ways of interpreting it. And in Thelema, one of our duties is to rejoice and to kind of recognize where we actually are as splendid and correct, and we're not worried about escaping. I don't think Thelema really has a nirvana or a heaven or something like this. So it's difficult to know what redemption would mean in a Thelemic context. But Crowley's purity doctrine from Liber Libellum, where purity means to accept the whole thing as it actually is without adding anything extraneous, it really is a Vedantic conception of purity, where your fallen condition is just your misunderstanding of what the world is, and to be put in right relationship to the world is the redemption, to have your understanding corrected. And this may seem like fairly simple to some people, but once you realize that true will is not free will, that there is a kind of fate and a kind of destiny, it's difficult to realize how one could be wrong if one is living according to a destiny. Like how could you be in error if there's only one path? If there's no counterfactuals, no other things you could have done. How could the thing you're doing, which is the only possible thing, how could that possibly be a mistake? But but it is this in Thelema there is this. It's a misunderstanding that gets corrected through practice, and I don't think I knew that before. It might have been something I was able to guess, but to be able to read Liber Magi with a clear understanding of what the text says, only because we've been over these other few, especially the thing about purity doctrine and Liber Libellum is new for me. It gives me a better understanding of, and that's the whole project, right? I mean, it's the project of spiritual work is often thought of as the project of redemption. So it's helpful to know what you're being redeemed from.
Yeah. Well, I think this is one of the difficulties I find with the Thelemic corpus, is that it is easier than we want to admit to cherry pick the things that we want to focus on, even when we claim that's not what we're trying to do. And I'm not trying to be facetious about somebody else. I'm saying literally us, And so doing something like this is really cool because it does give us a chance to engage with the material a little bit more closely, where, I don't know when the last time I'd read Liber Libellum had been. I did have a really strong opinion or a strong regard for it, but it had been a while. So, and it was re-engaging with it was, and particularly in this way, really was cool. Getting that deep into it and that, and yeah, being able to compare it and cross-reference it with these other materials in the Thelemic corpus is really elucidating. But because of the vastness of the Thelemic corpus, it can be hard to be able to manage it mentally, especially,
right.
If you're just on your own doing your thing. I can imagine, again, where it's just easier as in practical terms. It's just more practical to essentially cherry pick and just focus on one or two things at a time, essentially.
People should be able to do this kind of accountability on their own, where they read and reread and try their best to understand. If you're genuinely interested in something, and it helps if there's a practice that goes against the reading. If you're interested in, say, combustion engines, and you read a whole bunch about combustion engines, and then you try to build one, it doesn't work. That's evidence that you've missed something in your reading, and you need to go back and look again. Thelema actually is like this, where there's operations that can succeed or fail, and the success or failure allows you to then reread and correct your misunderstanding. But it requires a good deal of self-discipline, and maybe people don't have that around their practice somehow. So,
this is one of the reasons that I like doing this as well, us talking about these things, is because it's another layer. I mean, this is what I'd love to be able to see coming from these talks, is it's another layer to add to people's engaging with the material, so that you can, saturate yourself with it in different ways and get different perspectives on it and that sort of thing. Because there's so much you get out of discussing a piece that you don't necessarily get by yourself. you know?
Going into a discussion makes you accountable for the material in a way that reading it for yourself doesn't. You can say, like, I'm going to go back to this later, and then never do that. But when you're, this is something important. When you're teaching, not thinking of yourself as hoping the student will understand everything, or even like show up, especially in Thelema. The students just don't always show up. But the point of teaching is to create a little bit of an accountability engine for yourself, so that you can you actually have some responsibility to the material beyond just your idle interest. So I don't know, for me, for you, this is your podcast. I'm sure you'd love for people to listen, but for me, the point is really about getting a chance to do the work with someone else and get deeper by doing that.
Well, that's one of the things that I was thinking about too, is the fact that like the whole idea behind Toronto Thelema is essentially in service to the community. It's fostering a community for Thelemites and even non-Thelemites who are interested in just occult subjects and that sort of thing. But in this case, Thelema is also a very individual field of practice. And for some people, it's specifically an individual field of practice, and they're not so much into the community aspect of it. But and I don't think there's like a right or wrong there. I don't want to make it sound like I'm going to argue for one or the other, because I think there's strengths to either one. I think there's strengths to the hermit stage, and I think there's strengths to the lover stage, and I think that it's perfectly fine to take one or the other, or to oscillate between them. But what have you found in terms of what you would get out of these things from discussing them with another person, not just in terms of accountability, but what you gain from the other person?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to, like, if we disagree about something, to understand that there's something controversial about that something. Because I think people's blind spots allow them to just have one interpretation. If I read something in a specific way, even if that thing is multivalent, it may hit me as being absolutely crystal clear. So, and especially because of my peripheral reading and other sort of listening that I've done, like I've read a little bit of the Nietzsche, 3 or 4 books, and some Kant, and then a number of other authors on Magick. But I also, the inspiration for this deep reading idea was a podcast called Partially Examine Life that does lots of philosophy material. And so I just I'm aware that I have a lot of things going on that will bias me towards a particular interpretation. And some things may just, and when I read something, it may just be like, oh no, that's explicitly this, and that it's uncontroversial. And then sometimes, not often, but sometimes, like often, I think you agree with me or come to some of the same conclusions. But when I say something and you're and I'm surprised that you don't agree, that's really neat. That's and I guess the other thing is just that it's kind of fun to get into it, like to feel like you've worked on something well enough that you know it a little bit, and you can get excited about this passage or that passage, or read beyond the few things that stick out, and try to beat between them more deeply. It's just nice to be with someone around a piece of text
I agree, and I think one of the things that I find fascinating about it is like you say, it's like I'll see the text in a certain way, and then when you're I find it fascinating to discover what points you find interesting and important, and I will probably agree with you in a lot of cases, but I won't necessarily have thought of it in the same way initially. You know, I mean, I would have had my focus in a different spot, or chewing on it in a different way. So that's always interesting. I find that there's a certain amount of the bouncing back and forth between two people that creates a bit of a feedback loop that ends up getting something a little bit bigger than just the sum of its parts, you know?
What did we miss? Is there anything we didn't talk about that's sticking in your craw, or anything we got wrong that you want to clarify? Or is it not, I mean, you've done a lot of editing. I was just going to say maybe it's not fresh in your mind, but you spent so much time editing these that I'm sure they're all fresh in your mind.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's always sort of, little bits here and there, and things that we could have built on, and, stunning insights that I would have loved to have, gotten on tape or whatever. But nobody uses tape anymore.
That's too bad.
Yeah. You know what? Maybe we should do these things on tape. We should let's not do that.
And then hand copy them and leave them on the bus for people to find.
Yeah, why don't we just get a fucking chunk of rock and a chisel while we're at it? Go right back. That intimidates people now. They blew up the Georgia Guidestones because people don't like when you carve things on rocks anymore. It really fucks people up. Permanence my ass. Carving shit on rocks. I'm blowing this up for the Buddha.
80 years for that thing to be bombed. I wish I hadn't been so hard on Jack Parsons for his anti-feminism masquerading as feminism. I think he was really sincere in his appeal to, the ladies. That's a borrowed joke. That's for someone specific. Ladies, I think, his weird essentialism thing about, maybe women don't belong in government, but they have this other office that we get established for them over here. I think that is really meaningful. And what you were saying about the transvaluation of values, this thing about how women are not just failed men, and like for women to be in the workplace is a victory, and that women who work are somehow better than women who choose not to work, which I know is not really how the argument is structured. But the whole 100 years of feminism leaning on the fact that women can exemplify male virtues, and without realizing that female virtues are also valuable. I think that's something that Parsons was really trying to drive home. That women do have, or not that individual women have, but the feminine ideal is really different than the masculine ideal, and that feminine ideal has equal value. So even though when you read him closely, it looks like he's saying you should exclude women from government, which I think is really what he's saying. But he's also saying that that feminine attributes have a real value which deserves to be recognized. And I think that's a piece that continues to be missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely fumbling around in admiration, as I'm sure we all are. But it's not an easy thing to be a guy trying to express, support for women, because the longer you talk about it, the more asinine you end up sounding, really.
Yeah, and not only support for women, but like believing that you need something from them for your project to succeed. And so, and then to convince them that your project is actually the highest value of feminism and the thing they should be paying attention to. Even if you're right, like let's say Jack's right, even if you're right, that's still going to be a tough sell. And I shouldn't have been so aggressive with him for trying his best to do something really hard, even if he's wrong, like, or trying your best is still cool. And there were many beautiful passages and many things the paper gets right. So, so yeah, I think I'm right to point at the things, because there's a narrative about how, Crowley was super sexist, but less sexist than the people that came before him. And Parsons was a little bit better, and Grant was a little bit better. And now aren't we enlightened? And it's just really not how it works.
Yeah,
it's really not how any of it works at all. So I think it's good to point out where things that people are missing in their idealistic portrayal of progress.
Mm-hmm.
How was your, can we do a check-in on your yoga practice? You were doing lots of nice, nice Liber stuff when we last talked.
Yeah, it was coming along really well. I think the last time we talked, yeah, exactly. The past 2 weeks have been not good.
Okay.
So, yeah, I've been struggling to keep up at it, but it was sort of physical. It's not even like I was sick or something like that, but it was just sort of the combination of trying to get it in with that, trying to keep up the schedule that I had to maintain while keeping those things happening, the pranayama and the asana, and also having my body kind of feeling like it needed some downtime and that sort of thing, and not really getting the just basically struggling with it the same way that I think everybody does from time to time. But it has, there was I cut down to a half hour over the past few days in my attempts to keep at it. And I'm not sure if that was a good idea or not, because it does, you had mentioned when we were talking about 8 lectures on yoga, you were talking about the idea of living in hour-long periods of time, and if you get used to living in half-hour periods and that sort of thing, it becomes you get habituated to it. And I think there's some direct experiential truth that I've been witnessing lately based on that. So that's something. But
what you don't want is to give your mind the opportunity to run a con job. Mm-hmm. There's something in Crowley's diary that just lingers with me, because it rings so true about the but in the book that is called The Magical Record of the Beast 666, edited by Kenneth Grant. Mm-hmm. He talks about how cocaine is useless and it's a bad drug, and I don't want to do so much cocaine anymore. So I'm going to lock my cocaine in the medicine cabinet and swear my strongest, most rigorous magical oath that I will not unlock this medicine cabinet for 3 weeks. And then he looks down at the counter and realizes that the cocaine is not in the medicine cabinet. And so, it sounds like an excuse, but when you're actually living in this place, I don't want to pretend I've ever been a drug addict. I haven't, but like, it works with anything: diet, exercise, yoga. When you're actually living in this place of trying to pin down a discipline for yourself, the fact that you didn't, the semantic excuse that I don't have to unlock the medicine cabinet, I can do all the cocaine in the world without breaking my magical oath, really does seem like a material reason, like a material way out of your problem. And yeah, he just carries on doing way more cocaine than is healthy. So what you don't want is to give your mind any cards that it can play. It's this this idea that you have, this one thing that you're doing, and then your negotiating rational mind will try to find ways around it.
Yeah.
So I think cutting back from 60 minutes to 30 minutes is probably better than cutting back from 60 minutes to like 55 minutes. Because what happens is that it lays down a groove when you gack out early from your practice, and that groove hangs out for like 3 weeks. And so you'll be opening your eyes at 55 minutes, at 55 and 1/2 minutes, at 55 and 3/4 minutes. And those last 5 minutes become a weird kind of hell. And your brain will say, oh, it's only 5 minutes, or I should check and see if someone texted me, or is my timer broken? Like maybe my timer's broken. I should just open my eyes and peek. Whereas what you're doing to yourself now with cutting it absolutely in half, it's going to be really clear the first time you sit down to do an hour again, that 1 hour is much longer than half an hour.
That's true.
And it may happen that after 20 minutes, you think this must have been 40 minutes. And then you'll peek at your timer and go, oh, fuck. But if you can just be really, really disciplined, like the first 3 times, you might paper over that more easily than if you were giving yourself a shorter break.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, one of the things that might be useful to listeners is part of the what I'm talking about with the physical aspect is the pranayama was becoming quite a strain. I had upped it to what was that? It was basically a full minute, I think, last time I talked to you, and I did that for just a few days or whatever, and I was finding it quite a strain. And I realized, you know what? As I was reading back over the materials, it's like it emphasizes not to strain. And I realized that was a big part of my reasoning for backing off. I also went back a step, so I went back to the 15 out, 15 in, hold for 15. So I'm back at that stage as well, because I wanted to just make sure that I'm not straining and forcing it. So
that was probably a better idea than reducing the amount of time investment. Going back a step because you're not comfortable is probably okay. I mean, also, I think somewhere Crowley says that he overemphasized this not straining thing, and that some people who struggle for weeks and weeks and weeks might be in a position where if they would just push on to like the next phase, they would have it, but they're over worrying about this thing of perfectly easy before they go on and
well, that
progress.
Goes back to what I was saying about that insect mind. It's like if you overemphasize the dangers, then people are going to be afraid. They're going to be very gun shy. If you do the opposite and say just go hard, then they're going to they may not listen to those signs and things that come up, So it's just one of those tricky things about the way our minds work that we have to... It's like anything else. It's like doing workouts, exercising your body. You have to listen to your body. You've got to push it, because that's how you make progress. But you also have to be listening to it and know when, there's potential for injury and that sort of thing. And I think for myself right now, I'm still trying to get a feel for what the difference is. In this case, I was kind of worried about the strain aspect of it, and I probably, should have just bumped down and then stuck to the hour. But I think the hour was problematic for other reasons as well, so it's just a matter of whatever excuses I can come up with right now, pretty much. But
well, look, you don't have to leave any of this in if you didn't want to. I don't mind calling you out on tape, but I do think it's valuable for people to hear.
Absolutely.
When things are going well and when they're not going well. And
Lord knows it's not useful to just be listening to, some golden child talking about how they did everything just right and, didn't have any problems. That's not helpful to anyone, right?
there's a guy who I think we might both know who posts on the internet every time he hasn't had a cigarette in 12 hours. Every, like 4 times a year, he's like, no cigarettes for 12 hours, no cigarettes for 30 hours, no cigarettes for 1 week. And then he'll just stop posting. And then 4 months later, he'll,
cigarettes
he'll
for
do the
10
same
hours.
thing again.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, and I thought, if you want real accountability, post every time you do smoke. That's what you should be doing. That if you want to actually help with this, it's like, oh fuck, I smoked 3 cigarettes in a row just before. Living teachers are fallible, and I have a real skepticism about any living person around Thelema, and it's from experience, and it's from reading lots of beginner books, and I think people are scared, and modernity is not bad, but what's going on in modernity is hostile to many of the things in Crowley that were the best things about Crowley. And so people who do Thelema are just eaten up with bad faith and false equivalencies, and just, like I said, wallpapering over stuff. So, living teachers are fallible, and they're always fallible. It's not a problem of modernity, really. It's a problem of having a person in front of you. But working from a book, especially on something like this, where, oh, no, you really need to be really, really comfortable before you move on in your breathing practice. You don't want to overstrain yourself. I mean, breathing once a minute is hard. You should practice before you start breathing once a minute. Whereas someone else might baby themselves, and different advice for different people. You can't do different advice for different people when you're writing an essay. You just have to pick one piece of advice.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's very, very difficult to work from a book without a living teacher. Yeah. But then, of course, the living teacher, if the living teacher goes easy on you, and rather than giving you what you actually need, that's not helpful either. So, what's your favorite text of the 4 we've read so far, I guess?
Probably Liber Libellum, frankly. I mean, I've really enjoyed that and the Jack Parsons one, because the Jack Parsons one was just a joy to, delve into, especially, and to discuss and that sort of thing, because I feel like it was slightly, I want to say, unexpected. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but you know what I mean? It was just it was a lot of fun.
It is not what I thought it was going to be. And then after the first 5 pages, when I decided what it was, and it turned heel on me, it turned into something else. That was a nice surprise too.
And that's another one of those things I've carried with me since then, is that's always kind of in the back of my head, like his definitions of freedom and the way that he's talking about freedom. And I don't think he was far from the mark, frankly, in a lot of ways.
It's such a common way out for people when they say, no man is free until every man is free, or something like this. It's a way of excusing a lack of commitment to freedom, to say, oh, I recognize that you're free, but that means you have responsibilities. And then it gives you a way of just telling people what they should be doing, being incredibly prescriptive, and especially prescriptive around issues of altruism. It's a way it's a rhetorical move that allows people to go back to Christian morality very, very quickly.
That's true.
And so I was super scared that that's what was going to happen. And when he calls it liberalism, that's something that in the modern world points to something kind of pretty unhealthy. But his definition of liberalism really is pretty Thelemic and pretty good. And I don't think it, the responsibility of carrying the two-edged sword, that's the responsibility of the wielder. It's not a responsibility of anyone the wielder wants to bully into.
Yeah.
The wielder recognizes his own freedom and also the freedom of other people to be hostile to freedom, for example. Whereas you only have the responsibility of working towards the liberation of all mankind if you pick up the sword on purpose by yourself. So this idea that like other free people needs to be altruistic because of this rhetorical move, it's thankfully not what he does. It's on us who are Thelemites to defend freedom, not to bully other people into having false ideas about it, or even correct ideas about it. Let people have false ideas about it.
Yeah, allow people to have ideas about it, basically.
Yeah.
What was your favorite text?
I think probably the Parsons, because it was the most challenging and the most surprisingly beautiful. Like, I know that Crowley can write, but when Parsons was so able to construct a few beautiful poetic phrases, that was really nice and inspiring. And it was the most fun to struggle with, to go like, what the hell are you doing here? I don't know. This is not a real move. And then to find out that it was, but that it was a structural problem that was making me miss it, or the power of my own interpretive consciousness that was making me miss it. It was the most rewarding because the fruit was the most hard won, I think.
I had read that paper a few years back, so this was your first time reading it as well. So it was something that I threw at you out of left field, I think. But
yeah, thank God. Getting to read new stuff is just the greatest.
Yeah, maybe I hope we we're both able to make discoveries like that going forward as well with these discussions. But
because we already kind of hit on this beginner book thing a little bit and made all the standard gripes. What are your favorite? This is a question you wanted to be asked at some point. So what's your favorite recommendation for new people, both Crowley book and maybe a secondary book as well?
Well, anything Lon Milo DeQuette is doing, I think, is no, I'm kidding. Just wanted to make you angry.
I read about 5 of those when I was starting out too. So like the idea that he prevents people from being able to understand the text with his writing because he's apologizing and for things. I mean, that if Crowley would never apologize for. I mean, maybe that's valid, but also everyone ends up reading him at some point, and you and I both went deeper than him. So at least in this immediate case, it's sort of a false criticism to say, oh, once you read Lon, you never read anything else. We both did. He functioned in the way he thinks he's supposed to function with us.
Yeah, that's true. I would say as a beginner, just read Crowley's words. That's the most important thing. It's easy enough to get all kinds of recommendations, and I mean, you can get the standard sort of, read Magick in Theory and Practice, read Magick Without Tears. But I would just say read Crowley's own writing. And if you can, read it first. And if it's hard, everything worth doing is hard. And just spend some time with it. Let it sink in. Don't worry about, getting it right away. And if it's not that hard, I find with Crowley, you know, he was capable of writing with different layers because he was speaking to, like, with all this vast knowledge of things, and he was just bringing it up constantly, so that for people who are coming into the subject matter, who aren't steeped in it already, it can be a little overwhelming, and that's all. So what all that really means is that you can keep coming back to it and getting more out of it and being able to, you know, delve deeper into it and that sort of thing, and it can continue to grow with you. But I think the most important thing is if you just read Crowley's own writing. Hey, read his commentary to Liber. It's not that long. And it's really insightful in terms of the way he's describing the invocation of the Bornless One, and breaking down the whole idea of like wind, air, water, fire, and earth, and on dry land and in the water. And he's describing these concepts in terms of psychology. And in terms of spirituality, I found it very lucid and very eye-opening. But, you know, most people wouldn't suggest Liber as a beginner piece or anything like that. Right.
But, you know, if you come up with against a word you don't understand, look it up and then and follow the references in the footnotes. I don't know how heavily footnoted Liber is, but in many of his books, he recommends others of his own works. And there are ways on the internet to do that very easily. I want to put in a plug. I read, oh, you know, hell, I don't remember what the heck it's called. But the author is, I'll say Anti-Bulk. Let me just Google it here super fast.
Yeah, we live in the future.
I've been looking at this book the last 2 days. Anttibalk. So I'm going to say Anti-Bulk. If I'm getting that wrong, it's a $50 paperback called "The Law of Thelema: Aleister Crowley's Philosophy of True Will." The nice thing about it is that he writes very little. It's almost all quotations. But they're little essays glued together from quotations, sometimes quite clear and sometimes a little bit more difficult. But there'll be an essay on Thelemic morality, an essay on ontology, an essay on the one I'm reading right now is on prophecy, and it's a monumental achievement. There's bits pulled from, say, a dozen or so of Crowley's more prominent writing, stuff from the Confessions, stuff from the New Comments, stuff from the Temple of Solomon the King, all organized together in these essays on subjects. So if a person wants to know what the Thelemic position on X or Y topic is, they can look it up and read 12 pages of just Crowley quotes about that one subject with very minimal original material inserted by the author just to make the piece flow as an essay. And I think for the intelligent reader who, you know, knows what the word ontology means, or
is capable of looking it up,
or is capable of looking it up. Thank you. It might be a good place to start because it gives something coherent on some of the main subjects that you might be curious about when you're approaching a religion. And it's the difficulty of it is also something to recommend it. And of course, then you follow the footnotes and you see Magick and Theory and Practice, Magick Without Tears, the New Comment, and you go like, oh, these are the books that I should read. So for a first Thelema book, if we're going to go secondary sources, one that's mostly primary sources.
That sounds great. I mean, the problem with secondary sources is that the writers themselves don't realize how they're coloring the work, so much less do the readers, especially when they're new to the material. When you read something like that and you're well steeped in the material, it's a little easier. But, you know, when the writer doesn't themselves have like an agenda to deliver it in a particular way, they're unconsciously delivering it in a particular way. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that carries a lot with it. So it's always better to go back to the original material. And I mean, there's all kinds of Thelemites out there. There's all, you know, people who downplay Crowley and go just to the Book of the Law. There's people who are just completely about Crowley. There's people who are anything in between. But I would say we need Crowley's work because it's giving us the most direct in to what Thelema is and what it's all about. And I think it's always most important to go back to Crowley itself, his own actual writing. So I really like that as a recommendation, what you just gave there. It sounds like that would be really handy, having something that's dealing with the cross-referencing and whatnot, which is a little bit more difficult from the outset when you don't know where to get your bearing or anything like that.
I also want to put in a plug for the whole history of Western philosophy. Because when you start reading Crowley, if you don't know anything about sort of European ideas and the history of ideas in Europe, at least for me, certain things struck me as unique that were not unique. There's a whole history there's a whole tradition of philosophy dealing with the will, what willing is, how willing works. You know, we go back to Friedrich Nietzsche, and then back from Nietzsche to Spinoza, and deeper than that. And there's a whole history of philosophy dealing with the master-slave relationship. Crowley, in his introduction to the Book of the Law, says the Book of the Law introduces a new dichotomy, that of masters and slaves. But Hegel talked a lot about masters and slaves. Nietzsche talked a lot about slave morality and the slave revolt that leads to Christian altruism being thought of as the highest value. So these things that one is tempted to say Crowley's pretending that they're unique, but he isn't. He assumes you've read this stuff, and he assumes you've read it so hard that it's not on any of his reading lists. Nietzsche was fairly new, I think, in English translation, and every smart person was already reading it. So the idea that he would have to recommend it to someone, it would be like me recommending you watch Game of Thrones. Not that every smart person is watching Game of Thrones, but it's just the most popular thing going. So
I've not seen that, incidentally. So
good for you. It's too many hours, too long. Don't do it now.
Yeah,
I do not recommend you watch Game of Thrones.
And you know what? I'd say like it's also handy to be able to go back and look at medieval to modern magic that predates the Golden Dawn. But that's a little bit outside of the beginner range, but it is kind of good to get a little bit of grounding in that kind of stuff, because that's what the Golden Dawn was informed by, and Crowley was mainly informed by the Golden Dawn.
One has to realize that they must ever expand their reach. Mm-hmm. You have a duty to. Oh, this is embarrassing. But let's say colloquially, a duty to just keep getting bigger, expand ever the domain of your consciousness. Mm-hmm.
Pick up a science. Pick up a physical activity.
It's not a question that stops.
Yeah, exactly. Now, real quick, it feels like we're wrapping up here, so I would like to say hopefully we get a chance to continue doing these, far off into the future, so that we can continue to expand, perpetually. Mm-hmm. and it's been an absolute pleasure so far. And I know that people will not be hearing this for several months to come, so we've only had... we have the third, actually, as a matter of fact, we have the third episode of the podcast going up this evening at midnight tonight, shortly. So we haven't been getting feedback from anyone or anything like that, so it should be kind of interesting to see if we actually do get any kind of feedback by that point.
Where we are in 6 months when other people hear this. Yeah. It's been great. So, yeah, I'm starting school on Tuesday because arts work is for losers. So I'm giving up arts work because arts work is not work.
Just like Dad used to say.
Yeah, if you can't get paid for it, it's not real. So I'm going back to school on Tuesday and going to be sinking a lot of my time into reading that isn't magic. Unfortunately, but I'll learn some Latin. I'll know all the names, all the nerves and stuff by the time we next speak.
Nice.
But yeah, I do hope to. I do hope we can keep on this track because, as I said, I think it's very useful for me, and that's all I care about. Selfishness is the highest moral principle, and people should be more selfish. So, but so selfishly, thank you for giving me the opportunity to have these conversations with you.
And thank you, O gentle listener, for joining us here in the darkly splendid abodes. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Darren.
93.
Have a good one. 93.
This concludes our first season in the darkly splendid abodes. Look for Toronto Thelema on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Watch for episodes of Season 2 on the first and third Fridays every month.